Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Scottish Co-Mobility Forum. My name is Marion Marsh. I'm Senior Development Officer at Como UK, and I'm very pleased to say we have a really varied audience today, which means we're looking forward to some good questions later on. Do use the chat facility for those. We hope for a good discussion. We have a really good programme on implementing mobility areas. We have a number of speakers for you, which I'll just run through. We start with Richard Dilks, our very own Chief Executive of Como UK, and he will be talking on Como's work on mobility hubs and the rural context. Then we will move on to Jenny Milne from JLM, and Jenny will talk about the challenges of rural transport in Scotland, and there are quite a few that we're hoping mobility hubs might help to solve. Then we will be moving on to Julie Vinders from SEStran. And it's really interesting. SEStran has recently published a strategic study for mobility hubs in the southeast of Scotland. So we will be hearing about that from Julie. Then moving on to Martin Courtz from the province of Drenthe in the Netherlands, and he's going to be talking on mobility hubs and how to plan for success. It's particularly interesting because the mobility hubs that we'll be hearing about in the Netherlands, 4 of them were only opened last month, so they will have some sort of fresh off the press stuff to tell us there. And then we'll finish with Friso Metz from Advier, who has been working on implementing mobility hubs in rural area in the Netherlands as well. So to start the programme, I would like to bring in Richard Dilks, our Chief Executive of Como UK, and he will introduce to you mobility hubs in the rural context as seen in our work with Como UK. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Marion, and hi, everybody. It's great to be here. It's really great to see all of you dialing in. And this is an agenda item that we are extremely interested in at Como UK, both in the sense of the rural aspect generally with shared transport and mobility hubs, and then the combination of the two. Very briefly, Como UK is a charity for the public benefit of shared transport. So we are not modally defined. We're coming up on 21 years old this autumn, starting as a car club support network. We now cover car club in depth, bike share likewise, and e-scooters recently added to the fold in an outline way as the UK gets some trials going, although they remain generally unlawful except in those trial areas. What we do is accredit operators in bike share and car club and do unique research in both those fields. We work very closely with local and regional and transport and national authorities, and the public benefit part of our definition is really important to us. So public policy goals being met is absolutely key part of what we're trying to do. The Share North programme, which is an EU Interreg project that we are part of, and I'm delighted that we have some speakers joining us from other parts of that programme today, is a very fundamental part of what we're doing over that 3-year period. We're halfway through, and part of that programme is mobility hubs. This is an area we were sensitised to, of course, and hence us bidding into this project, and we're delighted to be working on. Our work so far has been an introductory guide, which you'll hear about, I think, a couple of points through today, which we published last November. And we've now moved on to doing quality standards drafting. So this is something in development, but we have got quite a long way down the track of working out a way that hubs might be accredited or judged. We want to be inclusive in our definition of hub up to a point, but it does matter to us that these things have some consistency and they have some quality without over costing, over engineering them. By a hub, we mean somewhere that brings an element or elements of shared transport, an element or elements of public transport, active travel, all together, designed, knitted together in the one place. This can be quite modest scale, and lots of rural applications will probably be relatively modest, or it can be very large. The term mobility hubs is in effect some shorthand and for some of them, I think it'll be a good descriptor, and we'll see some of these in action from these presentations today. There's plenty of these things across, in particular, Northern Continental Europe. Some places are into their second decade of implementing these, and indeed networks of these. In other instances, actually, I think mobility hub's not quite the right name necessarily. So, do think of a community hub, perhaps. In other words, these places can have a very heavy place function as well as a movement function. And it may be that some places there's a good case for something that's very place heavy and has some movement function almost around the edges of it, whereas others may be the other way around or mixing in the middle. There's also, I think, an interesting role for freight in this. So we shouldn't just think about individual transport users. We should think about institutional users, and we shouldn't just think about the movement of people. We should think about the movement of goods. In our guidance from November that I mentioned, we have 6 types of hubs, types of locations that we identified, and we've used those to develop our work since to the quality standards piece I mentioned. 2 of those are rural in effect, very heavy rural applications. One's small market hubs and village hubs, and one is tourism hubs. And I hope we'll get some sort of extra flavour thrown onto that today and learn more as we go along through this journey. We're doing some specific work right now in concert with one of the speakers here, Julie Vinders from SEStran, about their area and where mobility hubs should go. We're also doing some work with Midlands Connect, which is an area that covers from the Shropshire-Welsh border across to the Lincolnshire coast. That includes very large patches of rural areas. And we are committed to helping people who want to bring forward hubs to do so. So we have a Mobility Hubs network, which we formed this summer and has now met twice. Has very strong attendance from private and public sector. And we're now just starting to think, how can we use our quality standards, as I mentioned? How can we start to affect some policy change in the UK? Because we are in a world where there's lots of enthusiasm about these things. There aren't any yet, to my knowledge or definition. I think we're very close in a couple of instances, but we don't have a system, an ecosystem or a more formal planning system that really recognises these things yet, that understands them and enables them to be easily assessed. So I shall leave it there. I'm very much looking forward to these presentations and the discussion myself. I'll be listening in, and I can hand you back to Marion.
Thank you, Richard. As you will now all be well aware, there's plenty going on at Como UK, and we're hearing more and more about interest in rural mobility and rural mobility hubs. And of course, we're happy to help with any knowledge and advice whenever we can. We're going to move on now to look at the barriers to travel in Scotland and the way that perhaps mobility hubs might be one way to solve these. I'm going to introduce now Jenny Milne. She, by her own admission, lives and breathes rural, and she's very busy working freelance at JLM. She's a founder of the Scottish Rural and Transport Convention and Community, and runs wonderful virtual cafes to talk about rural transport. And she's also a part-time PhD studying rural maths. Thank you, Jenny. We look forward to hearing from you. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Marion. Great to be here. Thank you. So yes, Scotland. Welcome to those of you that haven't been to Scotland before or aren't based in Scotland. So just to give you a quick run through on how Scotland is. When we look at Scotland, rural is defined by how far somewhere takes to get to by car. That's an irony in itself. So keep that in mind. 98% of Scotland is rural. 20% of our population lives in rural areas, but that's growing very fast at the moment. And ironically, that population contributes 25% to our GDP. So when people ask me, is there a business model to work in rural areas? Yes, there is. However, although the car dominates, 10 to 15% of people don't actually have a driving license. We have a very eclectic mix of the population. We have a lot of visitors in traditional times coming from the UK and overseas. We have employment, which is focusing on fruit picking and tourism, and again, predominantly usually overseas. And that brings with it itself these peaks and troughs that we see quite regularly with employment. We also have a very high second home ownership in Scotland. In the Highlands, we have nearly 4,000 homes that are second homes, and on our Garland Butte, that's the second highest. With that comes other problems in rural areas, and that's about empty homes. In the Highlands, it's ranked #1 for empty homes for over 12 months. This has a huge implication on our network and our communities. You also find in the Highlands, a lot of people will commute to London, Edinburgh, Glasgow, and believe it or not, America from Inverness Airport. As a result, when you start to look at the Highlands and other parts of Scotland, there's a lot of home working, and these are traditional things that you'll only see an exacerbation in the current climate. We all rely on internet connectivity, but there is a move at the moment to deurbanisation and people moving to rural areas. So we're having a swarm of people renting properties long-term and short-term. And this brings with it connectivity problems. And that connectivity is whether the broadband or actual transport, getting goods and services. Our models in Scotland and the majority of the UK in rural areas rely heavily on subsidy and government funding. So naturally, they've been reduced in time. However, in Scotland, we have two things going on. We have a remote rural bill has been proposed to make sure that every piece of legislation that goes through considers our rural areas. We also have an Islands Act, which is there to consult and work with our islands and to make sure we have connectivity with our islands, which are so important to tourism and rural. So as this is a quick whiz bang through rural Scotland, I wanted to give you some real world case studies. Some of you will have seen these before, but I think they're really important when we're talking about hubs. The first one is about Chris and his wife and 4 friends from Bristol that want to come on a cycling holiday and want to go from Advier to John O'Groats. Now, it's a good cycle, but how do they get there from Bristol? Well, as you can see from the answer on the screen, they have bikes, and you can only get 2 bikes on a train at the same time. So a party of 8 cannot travel on the same trains. So they ended up having to take a car. They also get from Advier to John O'Groats, and they get to John O'Groats, and they can't get on the train to get back to their bed and breakfast in Galsby. So how did they do it? Fortuitously, they actually find an empty minibus which had been carrying bicycles to get a lift. But could a hub help in that situation? We also have some hitchhikers, Anne and Toby, who from Germany went round Orkney and went round Skye. And really, what you've got to start thinking about when you see hitchhikers is the fact that transport isn't always there. It's not a point of trying to save money. Sometimes it's just a clear lack of infrastructure. If you can't get visitors to the attractions, how do we make it happen in the real world? For those of you that don't know me, I'm doing a lot of work in the Cairngorm National Park, which you can see here in front of you. Now, my PhD has a case study here, and I also created Cairngorms Connected for this area. And I got money from Innovate UK last year to look at the barriers. And the barriers are so similar to what we hear in other parts of the UK and Europe. People are looking for infrastructure, looking for connectivity because we don't have it. They're looking at what vehicle design we have. Is it the right coach, or is it the right bus, or is it the right low floor? Have we got the right surface for cycling? Active travel modes are unsafe. Do you want to be on a busy main road with lorries doing 50, 60 miles an hour with no segregation and motorbikes doing 70, 100 miles an hour? Not very safe. Timetabling. At the moment, the challenges are very much around the synchronization not being there. We need to work on bringing that together, whether it's buses or trains or car sharing or hitchhiking. And that in turn means that information is key. And a lot of people have found that they cannot find the information that they need. And that's where I see hubs playing a huge important role. And that in turn, the social impact. People be able to access education, health, employment. At the moment, these are barriers that rural mobility has. We cannot get people to apprenticeships. We cannot get visitors to locations that we need. However, the good news is transport operators are willing to listen. We can make progress. We can work together. And that for me is the key, that we have to collaborate and we need to communicate so that these silos don't remain. And for me, as we're going to find out later on today, that's where hubs play a really important role. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. That was a really great introduction to life in rural Scotland. I have to admit, I hadn't realised 98% is rural. It's stunning. We really do need to focus on rural. No wonder this webinar is popular today. I also liked the way that you said we need to collaborate, you know, again, around organisations and silos, so important. So it's great we have a variety listening today to us as well. So So now moving on, let's think about planning mobility hubs. And I'd like to bring on now Julie Vinders, who is project officer from SEStran. And Julie has been working on promoting mobility hubs through their strategic study in the southeast of Scotland and as part of the Share North project as well. So that's a little bit of collaboration that Julie's mentioned. So now, Jenny, we look forward to hearing what's been happening at SEStran with your mobility study. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Marianne. Hello everyone, my name is Julie and I'm a projects officer at SEStran. And today I'd like to talk to you about mobility hubs and the strategic study that we developed for the southeast of Scotland, which looks at the potential role for mobility hubs in the SEStran region. So just a quick introduction to SEStran, my organisation. We're the regional transport partnership for the southeast of Scotland. So we cover 8 local authorities in southeast of Scotland, including the city of Edinburgh, but also the surrounding local authorities of Clackmannanshire, East Lothian, Falkirk, Fife, Mid Lothian, Scottish Borders and West Lothian. Like Como UK, we are also part of the Share North project, which is all about promoting shared mobility, and through which this concept of mobility hubs was really brought to our attention. And
Okay. Hello, everybody. I think we've got a little bit of a connection problem there. So I'm coming back on. We'll see if we can get back to Julie a little bit later on. I wonder if we could move on in the meantime and listen to... Oh, she's back. Let's see if...
Hi, Marianne. Sorry, I may have lost my connection there.
I'll hand back over to you again. Thank you.
Is that okay? It seems to be okay now. As long as you can hear me okay, I can just continue. So I can't remember exactly where I got cut out, but anyway, we're looking to introduce mobility hubs to our region, building on the experiences from our Share North partners, some of whom will be talking later today as well. So in the first step for us was to develop a sort of strategic study for our region, looking at the potential for mobility hubs in the specific Scottish context and the specific context of our region. So that was funded through Transport Scotland. It was an low emission zone public transport provision fund. So as part of that, we put in an application to develop the strategic study, which looked at the strategic alignment to our policy context of, that is, the regional transport strategy and the newly published national transport strategy. It also considers the typology components and develops or proposes a sort of implementation framework for mobility hubs, and considers the sort of tasks and steps that are involved as part of that. And finally, it looks at some potential locations. So it looks at some maps of the region and tries to identify where a mobility hub would add value to the transport offer in a particular location. So the definition that was developed is the following. A mobility hub is a recognizable and easily accessible place which integrates different transport modes and supplements them with enhanced facilities, services, and information, which are aimed at encouraging sustainable travel, create a sense of place, and improves journeys and travel choices. So that's quite a long way to describe what a mobility hub is, but that's essentially what it tries to achieve. So it's a bit more than just, linking two forms of transport together, and it really has that placemaking element as well, for example, and that the fact that a mobility hub should be a recognisable and easily accessible place. So the study also looks at some best practice examples, such as in Vienna in Austria, Bremen and Bergen, which are both partners in the Share North projects, and Graz in Austria. In terms of the components and the criteria that were developed for something to be a mobility hub, we say that it should at least integrate both public transport and one form of shared transport. It needs to provide safe and secure bicycle storage. It needs to be a place for everybody in terms of visibility, accessibility, and safety. It's about the redesign of space, so improving the public realm and reallocating space from private cars to shared mobility, shared transport, sustainable forms of transport. Is to serve local needs, and that's where consultation and community buy-in is really, really key as well. And finally, it's about creating a recognisable brand of mobility hubs. So the brand on the slide is what was developed by Belgian partners in the Share North project, and that's been adopted in the Netherlands as well. In terms of meeting policy objectives, mobility hubs have huge potential to address some transport challenges and can improve or aims to improve public transport, connectivity, supports the operation and delivery of low emission zones, so very much around providing alternatives to using private cars, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so also climate change, from a climate change agenda point of view, mobility hubs have huge potential, enable sustainable travel and behaviour change by providing a range of reliable transport solutions, therefore reducing car dependency, and that's really where shared mobility has that added value to, and complements the public transport network. Encourage active travel, improve accessibility for disadvantaged areas to health services and employment, and that's, for example, particularly in rural areas. In terms of the different types of locations, generally towns and cities are generally considered to have the sort of catchment where a mobility hub would work, but I think there's also great potential for other types of locations where mobility hubs would really work, such as new housing developments, and where transport and planning can be better integrated, and where there's a unique opportunity to integrate shared mobility as part of the transport offer that complements existing public transport networks, to try and encourage people to use sustainable modes of transport rather than resorting back to private car ownership. Obviously, railway stations and park and rides in those type of locations, mobility hubs could serve as some kind of linking hub and like an interchange. Shopping centres and business parks is where it's obviously like destinations, and rural areas where the focus of mobility hubs would be more on improving basic accessibility. And to say that, and I think it was mentioned earlier as well, and there's no one size fits all for mobility hubs. In terms of developing a hub, you would really need to consider what the added value of a mobility hub would, what the area needs and what the transport needs are in a particular area, and what the added value of a mobility hub would be. So in terms of locations in the SEStran region, there's two ways of looking at it. On the one hand, you can consider the demand for mobility hubs, so considering or basing that on, for example, population catchments, workplace population, key destinations, existing transport links, for example. So the map that's just on the slide now, that's of 5 in our region, which covers some semi-urban areas and some towns, but also some rural areas. So that's in terms of demand for mobility hubs. But on the other hand, you can also look at it from a sort of need for mobility hubs. So that's considering or taking into account the Scottish. So that's looking where there's currently perhaps a gap in transport provision and linkage to key employment centres, or developing a mobility hub would add value to people's accessibility to places. So look, if you were to identify a location that could really help make the case for why a mobility hub would be needed in a certain area, and particularly for something like rural areas or areas that are sort of on the edge of the public transport network, you could really make the case that a mobility hub would add value and sort of complement the existing transport network. So looking at it from a rural perspective, obviously we cover the area. The area we cover includes Edinburgh, but there are also certain areas that are quite rural and at the edge of the existing public transport network. So councils such as Clackmannanshire, East Lothian, Scottish Borders and Fife really have some quite rural areas as well. And the role for mobility hubs in those type of areas is really to improve connectivity and provide basic accessibility. Mobility hubs can also play a key role in addressing the equalities agenda and in encouraging social inclusion, because not everyone can or wants to drive a car, even though car ownership and car dependency in rural areas is understandably higher than in urban areas. Like I said, mobility hubs can provide first and last mile connections that complement public transport network, connecting communities, tackle transport poverty. So often, particularly in rural areas, people are forced to own a car because there's simply no viable alternative. But with mobility hubs and the sort of philosophy of or behind shared mobility of use it, don't own it, is that people can have access to a car when they really need it, and use a car when they need it, but use public transport for other forms of journeys. And it removes that sort of car dependency and heavy car reliance by creating more alternatives for people. It can also play a role in linking demand responsive transport, for example, with existing or conventional public transport, and shared mobility philosophy of use it, don't own it. So in terms of the next steps for the southeast of Scotland, like I said, we sort of developed our vision for mobility hubs in the southeast of Scotland through this strategic study, and we're working with the local authority partners in our area to consider where there's potential to take some of these proposals forward, and whether we can identify a location where we can develop a mobility hubs. So for any local authority or any organisation interested in developing mobility hubs, the sort of key steps for taking something like this forward is something like the following: partnership formation. Obviously, there is a range of partners involved in developing a mobility hubs, not only operators, but also local authorities, the community itself, to really try and make it work in a particular area. Obviously, identification of locations and the typology. So what are the transport needs in a specific location? Engagement and consultation is really, really key to get the buy-in from communities, but also from operators, and really obviously the objective of mobility hubs is to integrate different forms of sustainable transport and not for these modes of transport to compete. So really try and get operators on board to understand that it's complementary, and that's what mobility hubs are about. Obviously, there's some consideration that needs to be given to operational and management structures, but the study kind of touches upon that a little bit and builds on examples from the continent where these type of arrangements have been agreed and these challenges have overcome in terms of management and maintenance and sustainability of the hubs. And that's then in the process of implementing a mobility hub, you would then go into the refinement and more detailed design of a hub before you then move on to implementation and operation. So that's kind of the sort of implementation framework process that you would follow to develop a hub, which might be very big, might be quite small, depending on the needs of that particular area. So that's it from me. Happy to take any questions later on during the question and answer session. But yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Julie. That was really exciting to hear your definition of a mobility hub being so much more than just linking. Well, I say just linking, but with linking shared transport with other modes. It was good to hear about the other options of other services and placemaking and information. And also interesting that you were implying that one size won't fit all, and we have to really need to look at the location where we're putting that hub and the needs of the location. So I think that moves us quite nicely on to our next speaker. Martin Courtz works in the province of Drenthe in the Netherlands, which is a regional local authority, and is quite a few steps further down the line than what we've just heard, because they've recently opened 4 mobility hubs. And Martin is going to talk to us. He's the traffic and transport consultant and mobility hub project manager, and he's going to talk to us about how they went about the implementation of these hubs.
Thank you, Marion.
And look forward to your talk. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Hope everyone will hear me. As said, I'm Martin. I'm from the Netherlands and from the town called Assen, the capital of our beautiful province of Drenthe. We are working together with the province of Groningen, and we have a lot of hubs in our 2 provinces. But like Julie already said, there is not a hub the same. You have to make sure everything has to be at the right place at the right moment. The start of our project is kind of different than with shared mobility. We have a large public transport network, what's about 100 million euros, and we have an additional transport network, and those 2 networks were not combined. So the bus and the taxi drove behind each other, both maybe with 1 person in it, but we didn't know. So we want to improve that system to make it as one system, a combined network where the taxi will bring you to the nearest bus stop or the nearest hub when it's possible. If not, it will bring you to the destination you wanted to go to. But the places where you have to transfer between the public transport and the additional transport, we call those the hub. So that's kind of different. There isn't shared mobility, not yet, but we want to implement that in the near future. Like I said, we have a lot of services already at the hubs, and that's already visible in a bright blue color. like Julie said, you have to make one color, a unified color that everybody knows this is part of the hub, and this is part of the service we can find at those places. Here you can see a few examples. We have Wi-Fi. We have some fitness area, fitness equipment. We have drinking water. It's very good, very healthy for our travelers, and we have some bike storage boxes you can open and close with an app, and you can also pay them with an app. At the start of the project, like I said, we had the bus and we had our taxis, and of course in the Netherlands we have a lot of bikes, so bike storage is not an issue. That's more a problem with us. But we said it's more. It's not just the mobility hub. Why do we have to have hubs in the first place? It has to benefit for our social economic welfare of our inhabitants and our visitors. So a hub has to be is also for us a solution to make the city and also the rural areas accessible. Like in Scotland, everyone here has a car or has to rely on a car. Now, in the basic, everyone in the mobility has to ask this question: how do I get from A to B? We have a lot of possibilities, but it always the main feature is the person who asks that question. Why do I? You can also ask another question: why do I want to go to B? Because I have to go to work, or want to have to shop, or go on holiday, or whatever. If you want to do one or more things at one day, most of the times you don't have the time to use public transport or a bike, because the distance is too long, and B, you want to bring groceries or bring someone else with you, so you have to do that by public car. Here you have an example of how your daily trips may look like. You have to go to work, to go to the shop, to visit people, and this is why a lot of people travel or use their own cars, also for very short trips to, for example, the shop or the sports areas. But what if you can redefine the question? Well, I don't want to go to B where the shop is. No, I want that the shop is coming to me. And what if we can make at a hub a place where you can also pick up your groceries, where you can pick up your documents from the government, or you can log in online with school. That's now very popular here in the Netherlands with Corona. So why isn't that for also in the future a possibility? And if you can do that at a place nearby where you live, hopefully you can leave your car and use your bike. And if the bike is, the car is then only used for going to work, or for visiting your relatives, that's not so often. So maybe your second car or your third car or your fourth car isn't used as much, so you can get rid of it, and then there is a possibility, we think, to change to shared mobility and use the car that you want whenever you want. This, not by owning it, but by just paying for using it. And maybe in the final phase of this of the development of the hubs, you can say the car can leave the you can sell your car and use public transport instead, but that's for the very future. What we think is that not the modalities that are at the hub are the main success of the hub. No, it's the facilities. So that is where we have to focus on. And if you make a new transport system, we think you have to make a system that's accessible for everyone. We do that in basically with the hub taxi. So everyone can use it, elderly people who have poor mobility, but also if you have not the access to a regular bus or a public car. And accessibility is more than people who are sitting in a wheelchair. It's also people who don't know how to use the digital information or with already apps on your smartphone, people who can't read, people who can't afford public transport or the mobility. So we think it's more than only the physical accessibility. Our main focus on the success of the hub in the next years for us will be the people, the interaction between people. Everywhere you can see the facilities are there, but they're already there. It's a package wall or it's an automated system. What we want to do is bring the people back. So the interaction is always it's more important. If you don't understand the system, you can ask someone who can help you. The social benefits are bigger this way, and we think that by adding people to a hub, more people will use the place because they think it's safer and they feel reassured that they can get the information or the help if they want to. So in the future, we think this is a hub, how a hub will show. It's a meeting place. People can get there by bus, but they don't have to do that. You can. This is a library in a town called Roden. So you can work there. You can read a book, meet people, have a meeting, whatever you want to do. And there is public transport, and there is additional transport, and there are bikes. So you can. It's a place where people come together, and the need for transportation isn't the main reason to come there. So that was my story. For more information, you can see it on the website. But only sorry for the people in Scotland. It's only in Dutch, but maybe you can translate it.
Thank you, Martin. That was really interesting. And it was really refreshing to hear about this sort of human element, the interaction of people being such a key thing in your hubs. And it's also really nice to hear that you're hopeful for the future of involving shared transport as well as sort of part of the development of these hubs. Certainly plenty for us to take away there. So thank you. Our next speaker is also going to be talking about the Netherlands, and Friso Metz works for a Dutch consultancy on shared mobility and behaviour change called Advier. And Friso is very much focused in his work on building bridges between different sectors. And I think we'll find that he also has quite a close contact with the people and the users as well. So I'd like to welcome Friso and ask him to do our last presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Marianne. So hopefully the webinar will stay interesting until the end, at least. I will end my presentation with some nice picture where the sun is shining. It's not always the case in the Netherlands, just like in Scotland. But anyway, I would like to take you along to the area of North Holland, where we have implemented a network of Mobi hubs. We call it Mobi Punt in the Netherlands, and a punt is a point. So where are we? You know, we have the same thing like England and UK. Our country is called the Netherlands, and we have 2 provinces called North Holland and South Holland, and often the country is called Holland. It's no problem for us, but we have also a province called North Holland. You know it from the capital of our country, Amsterdam, which is in this province. And the province capital is called Haarlem. It's a smaller town than Amsterdam, but it's the province capital. One part of the province, it's called the Kop van Noord-Holland. It's in the north. And in this heavily populated area, there's still a rural part. And it's the upper part. And if you still believe that tulips come from Amsterdam, well, they don't grow there, they grow here. And in this area, we developed this Mobi Hub network, and we did this. There are a couple of elements in developing such a network. First, of course, it starts with a strategy. Then you have to organize things. Next, you have to design the individual hubs. And if that's in place, you need to change people's behavior, because they don't know what a hub is, and they are also not used to shared mobility yet. And in the end, you want to monitor things and collect data on the usage. By the way, if I use the word car sharing, that's what we use for what you call car clubs. So apologies for any problems with terminology. So let's start with the strategy. Well, for rural areas, and at least for the Kop van Noord-Holland, a big challenge is to keep the area accessible and to keep it vital. And vitality means vital people, but also a vital economy. And if the area is not accessible, it's difficult for companies to run their business. And you want to be accessible in a sustainable way as well. So here's some major challenges for any rural area, at least for the Kop of Noord-Holland. You also want mobility to be affordable for people, for example, with low budgets. So if they depend on having 1 or 2 cars, while they don't have jobs, that's a challenge. Another challenge is that you need to create a movement like shared mobility and Mobi hubs. It has to start to get going on. And another challenge is that Mobi hubs are very interesting, but they are a means. They're a means to reach these targets that I mentioned. So we also are part of the Share North project, and we rely on the same concept that Julie already explained. So I won't tell too much about what is a mobility hub. Anyway, an important aspect is that it should be the point of origin. So if you want to make a trip in a sustainable way, you go to the Mobi hub, and there's everything you need, from a shared car to a bus or a taxi or whatever you want. And it might also be a transfer point. And in areas with declining bus services, you cannot get everywhere by public transport, but with shared bikes and shared cars, you can get literally everywhere you want. So this transfer function is also very relevant. So these general targets have been operationalized in the aim to realize 40 hubs by next year. And in 2023, there should be at least 100 shared cars and 250 shared bikes. Well, how do you organize this? Well, first of all, it's very helpful to organize a planning workshop. So we had a meeting with all the municipalities in the area, and we supported them to plan the locations of the Mobi hubs, and it was very helpful to have interaction between the different municipalities, as the one municipality could say, well, this is a good place, but there are many difficulties and many local issues, while the other municipality says, okay, well, we believe that there are issues, but this is a great spot, so go for it. And this went in both directions, so it's very helpful to have a bunch of municipalities together and plan the locations of the hubs. Local involvement is a very important element in the organization. So they're from municipalities, and they will share their own fleets they have as a local government. So that's a good starting point for shared mobility. And we invite also the local politicians to use these shared vehicles for their business trips. So if they have a business trip to someone in the region, they can tell the story of what they are doing and show they're using the services by themselves, and they can invite everyone to take part of the system as well. A very interesting aspect is the cooperation with the social employment organization. You know, they do the green services in the area and some production and packages, deliveries, etc. And they will also take care of the maintenance of the Mobi hub. So they will clean it. But for example, if a shared car is in use by a person and another person wants to use the vehicle as well, that's not possible. But if they book the service in time, the social employment organization can move a shared car from another village to the right place. So we can always promise, if you book on time, there is mobility for you available. There's a guarantee. So another aspect is the cooperation with the business sector. There's a strong business sector, not only with tulip bulbs, but there's also plans of Google and Microsoft, and they need to be accessible for staff. And for example, if they want to have trainees or people coming for an interview, they need to get there. And that may be a challenge to get new staff. So if with the bike sharing system, the company can send a QR code to a customer or to a person coming for an interview, and they can open the shared bike and come to the venue. Adding to that, staff could also use shared bikes if the company puts shared bikes in place at the own site. So they can use the same system for making business trips, and they could also open it for adjacent companies. So you get a bunch of customers using the service. About design, I will show you some pics like I promised. So this is the railway station Mobi hub in the city of the small town of Schagen. Here you see a bus stop where we have shared bikes, so people can use the bike to get to the work in the local harbor area. This is a Mobi hub with shared bikes on a local bus stop, and if you look at the hub signage, it has been 3D printed, and it's fully reusable. And it can be it's sizable, so it's a new element of Mobi hub development. This is a Mobi hub at a shopping center in the town of Den Helder, and this Mobi hub is in a small village where we work with local ambassadors who will promote the shared mobility service with the residents. And this one is also very interesting. There's a network of local petrol stations, and they are looking for new business models. They already have quite a bunch of services like shops and other stuff, and cleaning facilities for vehicles, and they're highly interested in cooperating with us with the MobiHub development. And they are located at central places in the villages, and they're really a supporting partner for the MobiHub development. So, as I said, behavior change is extremely important. We live in a world, especially in the countryside, where people are highly dependent of car ownership. And if you want to change that, you cannot do this overnight. So there's several levels of behavior change that we need. First of all, we introduced this MobiHub concept, which is new. And we want to have a general acceptance of this concept. Like, we are already very happy if people realize that the MobiHub concept is something which is very interesting for the area, which is good for the area, for the local economy. If they understand the story, that's already a big step, even if they are not the right target group to use the services. But if they see that it's something that the region is benefiting for, and it's something by the region itself, like the social employment organization and the local business sector, then we already have reached a big part of our target. But of course, a MobiHub is successful if the services are used. So this picture explains that the shared car is looking for users. And of course, we have to showcase some vehicles, but we only put in place cars, shared cars and shared bikes if they're users. So if there's a business case, then we can put in place the vehicles. So high visibility is very important. So if the MobiHubs are visible in the area, there's a good way of wayfinding on the MobiHubs that's really helpful. And if people see it everywhere, they start to think, what is this? And I should know more about this. We also have some general information on the MobiHubs explaining what it is and what services are available. And of course, we have promotional activities for employees on the shared bikes. And we also have promotional activities for the residents in the area. And as I said, we only put in place shared cars if there's demand. So on the MobiHub website, people can see how many people have subscribed, have shown their interest, and they can subscribe for a bundle of kilometers, and every car has its own bundle. And if the bundle is full, we can put the car in place, and we can ask the people what kind of vehicles they like to use. And in COVID times, it's very challenging to have an interesting opening session. So we made a promotion video with, here on the picture, it's Theo Meskers. It's one of the big promoters. He is alderman of one of the municipalities, and he has been the motor on realizing this system. And I would like to end my presentation with one of his quotes. So Theo explains that MobiHubs, they deliver tailor-made solutions for the accessibility and the vitality of the countryside in combination with train, bus and e-bikes. So what he says is that MobiHubs, they are not something standing on its own, but in combination with existing services of public transport, but also bikes and e-bikes. Things can support each other and strengthen each other. So this is what we are doing. We just opened in July, so we really look forward to the first results and the first positive feedback from the public. So thank you very much for listening to this story.
Thank you very much, Friso. I really loved your 3D bike stand. I think probably that's the smallest hub I've ever seen as well, bus stop and bike stand, but it works, doesn't it? So interesting to see how adaptable these things can be. I also thought it was great that you talked about the importance of local partnerships, like with the municipalities, and finding these tailor-made solutions for people's needs in rural areas. That was great. Thank you very much. So that ends our presentations. What we're going to do now, I would like to, while I'm talking, to just invite all the presenters to come back with their cameras and their mics, please. What we're going to do next, before I hand over to the Q&A, is we've got a couple of polls. I did ask all the presenters for some ideas for polls, and we've kind of merged what came through. So we have 2 for the audience. The rest of us here will listen and ponder, and then I'll ask some questions about them afterwards. So the first poll should come up on the screen shortly, and then I'll explain what we will do. Can everybody see that now? I guess you can, as I can. Okay. So you can only vote for one. So what you've listened to and what you've been pondering on today, we'd like you to think about what is the most critical success factor for rural mobility hubs. And we can see people are voting away at the moment. So is it developing local partnerships, finding people who are willing to start car sharing, developing a recognisable branding, or developing a long-running marketing campaign? Really interesting result coming here. I think we've got 19. Oh, I think, yeah, we've got... it's interesting how it changes. I was about to say a percentage, and it changes. I think most people have voted if I do my math. So that's interesting. We've got 77, 78-ish% developing local partnerships being the most critical success factor. We've heard quite a bit about that this afternoon, especially from the last 2 speakers. And finding people that are willing to start car sharing, quite a chunk. And the other 2 we see as less important. So I should come to ask you speakers for a comment for that later. Could we move on to the second poll, please? Okay, so again, just 1 vote each person. The most significant role of mobility hubs in rural areas is to do what? Okay, so we have to reduce car dependency, to increase travel choices, to improve rural connectivity, to improve access to services, health, social, community facilities, and to improve social inclusion. An interesting mix going on there. Quite mesmerising to watch. Okay, I think we're nearly there if I do my mental maths. Just a few to come in. Okay, there's an interesting mix there. So improving rural connectivity is looking the most popular, but people are seeing everything as important, which is an interesting comment. Okay, so moving on now, I wonder if we can move on to some questions related to that. So if we go back to the first poll, I'm not sure if we're able to get that back on the screen, the most critical factor. We probably can't, but I can read it out to you. So we're looking at what was the most critical success factor, and overwhelming the result was developing local partnerships. There were also others mentioning getting people to be willing to start car sharing. I wonder if I can channel this question first to Friso and Martin. So this was very much what you were emphasising in your talks this afternoon. And I just wonder if you've got any words of wisdom on that we've obviously now caught on to that really is the most important thing. But are you perhaps able to give us some other indication as to advice on that?
Well, would you like to hear Martin or me first?
Let's have you, okay.
Yeah, well, if I look to the answers, I think everyone has been listening quite carefully to the presentations. So I agree that local partnerships is creating them is the most important factor. And of course, willingness for people to share cars is important too. But you have sort of create this willingness as well, because in some cases people want to start this, but you have to get to make them interested. So I think the partnership is the most important one.
Would you add anything, Martha? Any other comment?
For me, yeah, I didn't hear you very well, but like Friso said, we don't do it for the people. We don't make hubs for us ourselves as a government. We do it because we want to do something for the people who live there. So if there isn't the demand from the people who live there, we don't want to. You don't have to make a hub or something else, or a mobile point, or a bus stop for that example. So you can see it in the results of the second poll. Why do we want to do that? I think the main reason is social inclusion. Everyone has to join in. So most of the times we look only at the majority of the people. And then you have mainstream answers like 90% can travel by bus, so we only do a bus. But then we forget those 10%, or maybe it's only 1%. But those people also have want to join in the community. So I think social inclusion is, for me, the main reason why you have to do this, and that is going to health or to work or to have social contact with your relatives. So the base of it all is for me is social inclusion.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, I think that's a very valuable thing for us to remember. It's very easy in the transport field to think about the connections and the travel, but we need to think about the real impact on people's lives. I wonder if I open it up to the rest of the panel. I wonder if you have any comments on the other categories in the second poll, where we seem to have quite a mix of what people feel is the most important element. Is that perhaps a good thing, that people think different and we get a variety? What do you think is the most important, or do you think we should have a mix? And I'll open that to the floor. Perhaps somebody else would like to make a comment.
I can come in there, Marianne. I think so in terms of the second poll and the different answers there, it's interesting to see the spread of people's opinions, because I think essentially a lot of these answers are actually quite connected, because improving rural connectivity has a role in reducing car dependency, which is particularly high in rural areas, because people are forced to own a car because there's simply no other choice. So increasing travel choices with mobility hubs as well, and providing access to key services. So I think they're all quite connected there, and that's really where mobility hubs can play a role to just add value and increase the choices of people to travel, and not necessarily have to use a car because there is no alternative. So in terms of encouraging people to travel more sustainably, you need to provide alternatives first, which is an issue in rural areas, and that's where mobility hubs, in my opinion, play a key role in just providing that alternative and improving basic accessibility in the first place.
I'd agree with Julie. I think they're all interconnected. But the interesting bit for me would also be the increase to the community, because the community will be feeling the benefit. Maybe some areas aren't so community minded. You've got the business, you've got the economic, you've got the social side of things all coming together. So I think your improved rural connectivity probably covers the catch-all with everything there.
I think that's a great conclusion, really, to the scope of mobility hubs, isn't it? I've got another interesting question here, if I can put to the panel. This question is, is anyone aware of evidence of the role of hubs themselves supporting the transport services that operate through them? It's implicit for bus stops. It's pretty implicit, I think, for bus services, particularly in the UK and Scotland. So, is anyone aware of the hubs themselves supporting the transport services that operate through them?
It's a very interesting question. And I think evidence is hard to find as we are so early in this development. But if I get back to logic reasoning, then I see that that you're creating a point where things come together, and there the public transport services are available. So you're integrating these services in society in a stronger way. And one thing is that we saw in the city of Bremen, which is also a Share North partner, that Mobility Hub is working with round-trip shared mobility services, and you have free floating services like e-scooters and shared bikes, and they are cluttering at these mobility hubs because somehow they are places that have a strong function in the network, and people want to be there. So maybe that might be an early form of evidence.
Interesting. Does anyone else have another comment?
We have a good example is for us the main bus line between two large cities, Emmen and Groningen. I think it's about 2004 that we started there with small buses, 12-meter buses, 2 times an hour. We said, no, we don't go through the villages anymore. We stay on the main road, the highway, and we make stations along that highway. All that stations are now hubs. And what we saw is like the people come there by car, by a bike, and by other buses, smaller buses. And now we don't have the 2 times an hour a bus, but now in rush hours we have 8 hours, 8 times an hour a bus. And it's not a small bus anymore, but we have to have double deckers because the demand is so high we can't transport the people anymore. So and maybe next year we go with 10 buses an hour because that was the plan to do so. But now with COVID, we don't know anymore if we have the people back in public transport. But so if you combine it and increase the speed of public transport, then you can see that the demand will also be higher.
Sounds very positive. So yeah, there's a real link between the hubs and the public services there. Any more comments on that one before I move on to the next question? Or shall we move on? Okay, the next question is on public consultation. So what sort of public consultation do you expect around mobility hubs? So how would we consult the public on those, and what would we expect? Or what might we think we ought to do might be more appropriate for the British speakers that will not have encountered this yet?
We say we go and sit alongside each other, or for maybe in Scotland or England, you go to the pub with each other, have a good good meeting, and then you can feel if there is the people want it or they think it's something that not fits with their demands. So that's make it a low entry meeting.
Okay, so nothing too formal.
No,
I guess.
no,
Yeah.
Not in the beginning.
In a listening way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. Anyone else, any comments?
I think as well that because there's no one size fits all in terms of a mobility hub, and there's quite a bit of flexibility in terms of how you can design it and what sort of additional non-mobility related components you could look at and add to the hub as well. I think it's in terms of identifying those elements that would really add benefit for the community. It's really important to engage with them in the planning stage. So whether that's local community groups or involving accessibility groups as well, for example, what sort of needs they have and how you can design the hub to really fit their needs and to really have the added value for the local people. So I think in terms of involving them during an early stage is really key in designing a hub that works for, in the end, the end user.
That's interesting. I wonder too if having those relationships at the start gives us also an opportunity to be able to measure impact later on as well, hopefully. I'm going to move on to the next question. This one relates to COVID-19. COVID-19 has had serious impacts on public transport ridership. We've certainly seen that in places like Edinburgh. I'm sure you have in other places too, and in rural areas too. So this is saying unless confidence is re-established, this will translate to cuts in services, public transport services. So how does the rural mobility hub concept address this challenge or these challenges? Would you like me to repeat it? It's a little bit complex. So because COVID-19 is having such serious impact on public transport ridership, unless confidence can be re-established, this will translate into cuts to services. How does the rural mobility hub concept address these challenges? I wonder if anybody that's not spoken yet might like to take that one. Putting you on the spot a little bit.
I was actually going to say the guys will have more hands-on experience on that at the moment because they're living and breathing it. But for me, if the hub isn't just necessarily about the transportation and it's about the economic viability of the area and is offering different services, then the hub will bring and keep people there, and it's about the information. So picking up on the thought of picking up your packages or speaking with somebody, it might be the post office is there or it's a social point. It's that trust and confidence, and the COVID 2 words for me are trust and confidence, and it's making sure people have that capability. But the two guys are living and breathing it, so that's why I was staying quiet, because they know what's happening in the real world.
This is true, though I wonder whether perhaps in the Netherlands people are travelling on buses more normally. I've heard in Germany, for example, that they are. What's the situation with travelling on public transport in the Netherlands? Are people coming back, or are they still scared and because of social distancing they can't fill the buses? Is it the same situation for you? Yeah,
we have now about 40% of the people back in public transport. But now with the holidays, we lost the students, so that's a big part of our demand. I think they will come back, but it will take time, and it will take more time than our government thinks, because we have a health. We get a lot of money to make sure that buses can ride this year. But next year there will be, I think, cuts in our in the bus services that we now provide. But in the end, in a few years' time, people will see that the car they just bought, because they don't want to travel with public transport, is not the solution for the long term. So the main focus point for us is the city of Groningen. And the whole city is banning the car. So you have to park your car at the edge of the city. then you have to do the last part with shared bikes or your own bike, or with public transport. So, and then you can use to travel with public transport, and then they do the whole trip with public transport again. So we will. I think it will be 2 or 3 years, and then the riders will be back.
Marion, just a
yes,
sorry,
Richard.
a thought on this one. Where I think we're going to have to wait and see how this pans out. Clearly, we at Como and probably everyone else speaking here and everyone attending is in our different ways. We're trying to have a green recovery, a recovery not back to where we were, but a better place than where we were. There's some headwinds on that, but I think one thing is important to think about with hubs and COVID, which is I suspect one of the long-term effects of COVID lockdown and ongoing situation pre-vaccine and so on will be increased localization of people and reduced travel demand. So obviously we've seen that on a sort of almost mesmerizing scale just for the last few months, and that won't keep on like that. But I think there's enough big decisions being taken within big institutions of employment of all sorts about what work means and where people do it, that lots of people are re-examining where they need to be and how often they need to move from where home is and therefore where home can be, and all of that package of things. So there's something there, I think, to be captured, which is all sorts of different things coming into one. But if you think from a rural perspective about how hubs could help communities continue to thrive or even turn something of a corner, then it could be quite exciting, I think.
Yeah, we live in unusual times for anyone trying to predict the future, don't we? There's certainly a lot of hope around mobility hubs and the more sort of local demands and so on. Yeah, thank you, Richard. I've got a totally different question here. It's on the business model of mobility hubs. And it says, how does the business model work for a rural hub that is self-funded, even at a basic provision level? I'll just repeat that. So how does the business model work for a rural hub that is self-funded, even at a basic provision level?
I have to say, I think this is the holy grail, because the same answer and same question for how do you make rural transport sustainable. And I know in the chat, there's a lot there about technology and things and the role of it all. But how do we fund this? And what does the model look like? If somebody has the answer, they've won the lottery.
Yeah. I think it's a concern that we all have.
No pressure, guys, but have you won the lottery?
Yeah, it is a concern. I mean, I wonder in time, does anyone think in time, as we develop these mobility hubs, that they may become the way that they evolve to be a better business model in themselves? I mean, is that something to hope for? Or any other comments?
I think it links a bit into the question.
I think you have to don't look at the business model of the hub as itself, but you have to look at the costs of making the whole society accessible for everyone. So this is a small part in a large system, and maybe this part is costing money, but it saves money at another part of the whole area. So we, from the start off, we didn't look at the business model of the hubs in Groningen and Drenthe. They don't make money; they only cost money. But the benefits are somewhere else. So if we can improve accessibility of the rural area, and by that the accessibility and the people can live there more easy and make more money with their jobs, then that is the main benefit. So not the hub. The hub will always cost money, but that is what we as a government don't think is a problem.
Saving money in other ways. Yeah, Julie. I think Julie was going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think it'll be interesting to see just how I think the concept of shared mobility has been out there for a great number of years, but I think a lot of people, just general public, are still quite unfamiliar with the concept. And I wonder, you know, it often gets talked about like what it needs to be a critical mass for shared mobility to function. So it only really works in city centres, for example. But I think it requires a bit of rethinking and thinking outside of the box, that shared transport and the concept of use it, don't own it would change over time as well, and therefore work in any setting, whether that's rural or urban. But it kind of requires a bit of rethinking the way we travel and our behavior, sort of that behavioral change, which is not really something that, you know, can happen from one day to the other, but I think you can see happening over time.
Thank you. I'm really tempted to ask this next question. It's a long one and I need time to thank everybody. So what I would ask is if perhaps the panel, each of you, could just give me a one-sentence quick answer. I'm going to read it to you. 10 years or so ago, we looked for potential rural hubs for the North Wales Transport Plan. This is what the authors said. So interestingly, we found that village petrol stations, which often had convenience shops attached and acted as parcel points, looked good prospects because of the combination of activities. Rural areas will always need cars, so saving the petrol station for later conversion to charging points may also be useful. Do the speakers agree that mixed use may make a hub sustainable? One sentence each, please.
I'll go first. Totally agree. Full stop. New sentence. Sorry, Marion. New sentence. When I first ran the Scottish Rural and Island Transport Convention in 2018, one person came along from a local Aberdeenshire garage. They saw the importance of the role of the garage, and if you look at them, what they're doing now in COVID, there'd be a case and example for a hub to be explored. And so I think they're absolutely critical and a lifeline. More than one sentence, sorry.
That's okay, thank you. Friso. Not hearing you, sorry. Can you put your microphone on? Okay, we're not hearing him. Martin.
Totally agree, but not only petrol stations, but every service that is available, please keep it and make sure to combine as much as other services to that place.
Okay, so. Julie.
I would agree as well, and I think also repurposing is really, really key in adapting to the changing needs in transport. So yeah, that's a very short answer.
Thank you. Friso, I think we've got you back now. Oh, we haven't. What a pity. We can't hear you. Okay, I'm going to pass to Richard and we'll see if we can hear you one last go afterwards. Richard, please.
Okay, so yeah, one word answer, yes. One sentence answer, yes. Super important to look at what is already on the ground and think how that can be partly anyway repurposed. Same thing in urban actually. And I noticed Martin's comment in the chat about BP, and yes, we are talking to them. So yeah, these are natural supply demand clusters already. So that's where you start looking. Other such things, village stores, of course, also really interesting.
Thank you. Friso, one last go. One quick sentence if we can hear you. Sadly not. Okay. I'd like to thank all the speakers so much. It's been a really, really interesting afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us and contributing to a really good discussion. I'd like to thank everyone that's attended or is listening later when we send the recording out. And a big thank you personally from me to the technical backup I've had on my phone and with people working in the background. I couldn't have shared this without them. We will be mailing out a quick questionnaire, a short questionnaire. Please fill that in for us. We want to know your comments. And just some final quick announcements. I've got less than a minute. I will try and do it. We have, and our next forum is going to be bike share, and we'll be sharing some Scottish bike share situations in September. Date not fixed. Keep looking on the website. We will also have some news on the UK's first school bike share, which is also in Scotland, and some more COVID-19 research on the impact on bike share. Look out for our November conference, 17th to the 20th. Again, news will be on the website. Join up to our newsletter. Do email me. It's Marian, MARIAN, at como.org.uk. We would love to hear your comments and things that we haven't managed to share this afternoon. It's been a great afternoon. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.